So back in 2020, I worked for a restaurant tech startup in Australia. I was actually the first commercial hire in the country. So pretty exciting position and my welcome to the startup world. Super early, we had a product. It was actually quite heavily reliant on integrations. And we had two of the major integrations, but we're also missing two of the key players in the market. So needless to say, pretty tough to sell. No management, no sales playbook, no existing customers, no brand, no trust, no recognition, basically a scrappy startup. So me having a little bit of self-confidence, maybe a little bit of delusion, I had to build the sales playbook and had to start from scratch. Now, I didn't have a framework. I didn't have a frame of reference. I'd never worked in a startup before. So honestly, this was basically brute force of how I, closed 700 restaurant locations in the country. Now, the one thing we did have was data. So we had a Salesforce account. We had quite a lot of restaurant names, websites. We had some phone numbers. We didn't have owners or anything like that. I had to go and figure out how to go and find that information. Now, remember, this is pre my knowledge of Apollo.io. This is probably pre-Ocean. I'm not sure when they were founded, but all these data tools, sales tech, Australia in general is quite far behind the US in terms of go-to-market technology. So I didn't know any of this. I am figuring it out as a young sales rep. Now, luckily, I found Lusher. Lusher was amazing at getting mobile numbers in Australia, at least. I haven't really used it too much since, but great product back in the day. I also found Hunter, and Hunter was able to get email addresses. Email addresses for the restaurant industry is not super useful. These guys just aren't on email per se too much. So my main focus was cold calling and then actually in-person meetings. So what I would do, I would literally look on Google Maps. I would go onto Google Maps, and in Australia, I know Parramatta, for example, has quite a high density population. A lot of Lebanese people live there. So I know that, sort of fast food and things are quite popular in that area. So I would get the top postcodes in the Parramatta sort of general area, zip codes they're called in the US for my US people, go back to our database and then filter by those zip codes. And I'd get a list of, 100, 200 restaurants or whatever. Then I'd go into Google. Most of the time I'd have to find their number and I'd call them. And my goal was to book in-person meetings for the next day, the next 2 days, or the next week. I would stack up 8 to 12 meetings in a day. The more the better, because some of them are going to pull out. They're not going to show up. They're not going to be at the restaurant. Restaurant owners are very, very busy people. They run around. They've got a supplier meeting. They've got another location. So they're quite difficult to sort of track down. I would get 8 to 12 meetings booked in. I lived very far away from Parramatta. I'm talking 2.5 hours on a train. So I would be on the train. I would sleep because it'd be early. I'd wake up and then I'd get my phone out and start texting these people. So initially it was a cold call. Hey, I'm coming there next Tuesday. I would love to come to your restaurant and talk about this. Great. Locked in. What's your mobile number so I can text you? Great. I would text them on the train. Hey, I'm going to be there at 9 a.m. See you soon. Now, some people would drop out at that point. They would forget about the meeting. Oh, I have to stay at home. I got to drop the kids off at school, whatever it might be. Any excuse. Some would drop out. I would usually get about 6, 7, maybe 8 meetings done in a day, and I would close people on the spot. So I'd go in, say hello, shake hands, everything, walk around, actually have a good look at their delivery setup. So their Uber Eats tablets, their DoorDash tablets, all that sort of stuff. Have a good look, make a connection. Sometimes they'd cook me food, which was nice and, efficient for me, and then close them on the spot. And it was super fun. I closed around 300 restaurant locations with this method in around 5 or 6 months, I think. And then the other 400 that I closed were over Zoom. They were larger deals, multi-location deals, and slightly different product to the first one most of the time. Having said that, I did close 70 locations on the same product. So all over the phone as well as you move up into mid-market and enterprise level deals. Now, what did this teach me about startups? I've helped over 10 startups now expand into the US, obviously a different market than Australia. But ultimately, the early days are very scrappy. I didn't know this at the time. But essentially what I did to get to the point of, closing deals as the first deals in a country was basically the framework I have now, just not as well defined. So there was no step-by-step, walk you through the process to get to that point. But what I did essentially is a very scrappy way of what I do now for startups in the US. The product in the early stages isn't going to be perfect. Everyone knows that. You do have to sell the dream a little bit. For us, it was this integration is coming. For a lot of people, it's this feature is coming. You do have to build enough trust that you're the guys that are going to solve that for them and you're actually going to deliver on that roadmap. In the beginning as well, do things that don't really scale. A lot of people are focused on scale too early. First, learn what it is you're selling. What are the actual problems? That's fairly basic, right? And a lot of the time you're going to do that from things that do not scale. In the US, unfortunately, we have quite a geographical limitation. So if your customers are based in California, you live in New York, you live in Florida, that's a 6-hour travel. It's a lot. In Australia, everyone's pretty concentrated in Sydney, Melbourne, maybe Brisbane. But in terms of business, like not many people are in Western Australia, which is the equivalent of traveling from Sydney. Well, Sydney to Western Australia is the equivalent of, New York to LA. So we're a little bit more geographically friendly, I would say, in Australia to be able to get on a plane or, just go to Sydney for a day, whatever it might be. But do the things that don't scale, get in front of your customers and really learn from them at the beginning. Now, if you're a founder outside of the US looking to expand into the US, that's a massive challenge. So very difficult for you to fly from India and get on a plane just to meet, one customer. Trying to make that in-person meeting efficient where you can go and meet multiple customers in a similar location. You can arrange a dinner. Again, those things are hard to organize as well. If you're a startup and you don't have any brand recognition, even getting people to a dinner can be a challenge. So really trying to figure out if I come to the US, how can I make my time here very efficient is super, super important in the early days. And if you have a competitor who's meeting people in person and your potential customers, they're going to win 9 times out of 10 just because they're there. So something to really think about. It's going to be scrappy. It's not going to be easy. And you'll probably spend a lot of time on a plane. But, hopefully it'll all be worth it in the end.